and welcome to Chatting with Jocelyn. I'm so glad that you could join me. Just so you all know, we think the storm's gone by. There was a lot of rain and a lot of lightning and thunder, but if you happen to hear it during the show, this is the big storm they talked about. The first time in a very, very long time, my phone actually started vibrating and buzzing, and I, pulled over and I looked at it, and it was a tornado warning. So I don't think we had one of those. I hope we didn't, but it was a little exciting. That's the adrenaline rush that I never got rid of. I don't think you ever do. So I want to thank you again for joining me. And my guest again today is Elliot Axelman. And you know him from all the books that he's written. He's an author and activist, and teaching us all about the law, the Constitution, what we should know, what we shouldn't know, what we're looking for, what we shouldn't be looking for. What is life really about? Do we really know? Are we really educated about what we should know about? So today's show is about real money, and it's going to be an eye-opener. I knew little bits and pieces, but in the last month, yes, 4 weeks, 30 days, not a very long time, all these bits and pieces have come together for me to understand what's the deal with silver? What's the deal with gold? Gold-backed currency. We don't have gold-backed currency, but wait a minute, we've got a bunch of countries that their currency is now gold-backed. Well, what does that mean? Why is that important? What happens to our dollar? Why is a dollar called fiat currency? Well, I learned, well, I kind of knew, but I learned for real that it's based on fuel. And so its value came from oil. Whereas back in the day, money was gold and silver, and this wasn't based on that, and that based on this, and I think this, and I feel that, and I want. It was gold and silver. There were dollar bills. This is a great story. I love this story, so we'll have Alu tell you this. Dollar bills that on the top said silver certificate. I just got 5 of them 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It looks like a dollar bill, and right on the top, above the United States of America, it says silver certificate. So I said, what is that? Why does it say silver certificate on there? Because before 1930, was it before 33 or was it 70s? Those two stories mix me up.
The backing of the dollar and gold and silver, well, this was even before that, I believe.
Okay.
But it all kind of changed incrementally from 1930, 1940s, and then 1970s.
Right.
I think around 1970, Nixon totally took it off.
Okay, that's the number I'm remembering. You used to be able to take that dollar bill that said silver certificate or any current paper currency. It said silver certificate, gold certificate, whatever it said. You could go to the bank and say, I want a silver dollar, and they would give you a silver dollar because they were worth the same thing. They're not anymore. So with that little tidbit, I want to thank you, Alu, for coming again. And it's just, as always, wonderful and so informative and educational to have you here. And you talk about everyday events, everyday occurrences, so we can actually identify with what you're saying. So take it away. You've got all these amazing things sitting in front of you. What are we looking at?
Yeah, hopefully we have time to get to everything, because I want to do like a 7-hour introduction to the basics of money. And disclaimer, I'm not the biggest financial expert or even historian in the world. You'll get some real experts like Silver Dave on soon, maybe. So Liberty Block does work officially with Silver Dave. We're affiliates now. We do ads for him. Okay. So he has a store called the Silver Pool and Ware. And so going back maybe thousands of years, the people would exchange things. They would barter. So maybe a million years ago, people, cavemen, would barter. Some people would grow wheat and some would raise cattle. And because the guy who had wheat had a lot of bread that he made and the person with cattle had a lot of meat, they would trade so they could both have meat and wheat. Makes sense so far. But what about people who are fishermen who will have tons of fish and they give it away and they need to get something like wheat, and the people who have wheat want to trade for a lot of fish, but they can't store the fish for 5 years, but they want to buy a big amount because of the wheat from that product from that year. So eventually they needed to have some third party, some kind of method of exchange that was not physical commodity, because the meat and the fish won't last forever. So they needed something that kind of lasted a long time. And that comes full circle. I'll explain what lasts a long time. So they eventually developed something that had to be scarce, not too scarce that didn't exist, but something very scarce, unlike a rock. So at first, maybe ancient civilizations might have used some rocks, but they are so abundant, there are billions and billions or a trillion rocks, everyone can have a certain rock. And also there are other issues with it. So it's also quite heavy for the value of it. So ultimately they found something that was perfect, and separately in different regions of the world before we were also connected, like thousands of years ago, separately, I think every civilization actually settled on gold and silver as the things to exchange. And again, because it had to be mined and processed and refined and stuff, and governments or other organizations would coin it and stamp it, meaning the verb coin used to mean pretty much just stamping it and certifying that this is 1 ounce of pure silver, right? So, and that's in the Constitution, actually.
Correct.
The only one of the few things the federal government has the power to do is to coin money. And what that meant, going back hundreds of years, like 1776, when people would go to the government, they could bring their raw silver and gold bullion, and the government would take it for free, I believe, because the government, with taxpayer money, they would take it and stamp and make it into a 1 ounce coin.
Okay.
And same with gold, I believe, for 1 ounce or maybe smaller denominations. But that's coining money. So one of the things in Article 1, Section 10, I believe, the Constitution says the things that the states can't do. One of them is coin money. State governments are not allowed to coin money. They had state banks, but as far as coining the actual money, only the federal government had that power. Now, what's interesting is Article 1, Section 10, I believe, lists all the things states cannot do. They can't, have, I guess, they can't coin the money. They can't do a few other things. Can't enter compacts and contracts and declare war.
Correct, because the Constitution was about defense, infrastructure.
But guess what's not on the list
trade.
of things that's forbidden for states to do?
What?
Secession.
Secession?
It's not on the list.
It's not on
the
list?
They could have put it there.
So we can do that.
Yep, so it's very simple. So it is totally constitutional. So that's another good tidbit. So anyway, we had the gold and silver civilizations for millennia using it as currency. Eventually, people would save up and they would build up a lot of money, and they would store some of their gold, maybe 1,000 ounces of gold in a bank. And then eventually bankers, and I think a lot of civilizations, got kind of greedy and said, let's lend out the gold, but instead of lending out the physical gold, we can lend out a certificate. Let's lend out a paper, a note, and that's where I think the note comes from. It's debt, and it says, take the paper, and you could trade the papers amongst yourselves, and it says on it, this grants the bearer on demand 1 ounce of gold at the Axel Bank, the name of the bank. Now, people traded these things because it's easier than carrying around tons of gold or silver. Silver is very heavy. You have to have, thousands of these to have enough value for like a week's pay. So they carried around those papers instead. Then the banks kind of got greedy and said, well, since it's only paper and we print the paper receipts, we can lend out a little more than we actually have. We don't think everyone's going to come collect their gold and silver at the same time. And that's what's called a fractional reserve. And that was kind of the origin.
So they have a fraction.
Exactly. They don't have 100% of the
money,
reserves they have on paper.
Which is pretty scary.
Yeah. So right away, I think that's kind of slimy and kind of corrupt. I think banks can make money just from interest. They could give out loans and charge interest, but they should have the money in case everyone makes money on the bank. Yeah. And then from there, things just devolved and got more and more corrupt. Then governments had to, or they felt they had to step in and have more and more regulation, because if there's a run on the bank, then you're screwed. So they said, let's create a whole network system. And Alexander Hamilton and others, even from 1776, wanted one central bank, and that way they can control everything. But pretty much...
And have one type of paper currency that they alone. So taking all the different currencies, paper currencies, that the individual banks, private banks, all had their own, they brought it all under one.
Yeah, so until sometime, I think the 1800s, every state had its own bank, and they had their own notes they would issue, and there was competition in currency. Meaning, if the federal government would print $1 billion, their currency would plummet in value, and it wouldn't have much value because there's competition. One of the things, I forget which president did it, one of the things that the federal government did, which was disgusting, is they used, I think, a 10% tax. They taxed every state bank into submission. So they destroyed every state bank, and then it said, oh, they're all dead. The only thing left is the federal central bank.
You need us. We're going to guarantee everything.
They
Come
killed all the
to
state
us,
banks.
people, and made it one currency.
Yeah. So anyway, some of the founding fathers, a few of them wanted a central bank. Alexander Hamilton wanted it, didn't really get it, although George did convince George Washington to make him the first Treasury Secretary. So he was Secretary of the Treasury. He was interested in money. So eventually there was a first central bank. It expired after 20 years, I believe, and this is like early 19th century, I believe. It expired in 20 years. They did not renew it. Again, a few decades later, someone made a central bank, but it only had a charter for 20 years, and it's one of the things that sunsetted that Congress did not renew. So it ran out again. Then there were 2 or 3 of these, I believe. Then the Civil War, long story short, Lincoln did print a ton of money, and that's, I think, when the term greenback came into being, because they were pretty green, the notes. Then they phased them out of circulation. Lincoln went after the war because they had war debt. So they had a ton of debt from the Civil War. Then they phased it out, and they said, we're going to go back. It was kind of slimy, the whole thing. Eventually, they actually did restore some confidence in the dollar, because right after the Civil War, even the Union had very little confidence in the dollar, because that printed so much in their debt. But eventually, they actually, I think, did get some confidence back by stopping the printing, like they said they would. So they did slow it down. It was fiat. They said, well, it's only temporary for the war, and they did kind of go back to not so fiat. Then I think it was gold-based. Then, so 1860, fast forward to around 1900. Then finally 1913, you got to read the whole book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, written by G. Edward Griffin.
Exactly.
Yep, I have the book. I haven't read the full thing yet, but I heard him give the whole speech. But I want to read the whole book. So it explains how the Federal Reserve was made. Again, genius, a bunch of congressmen, a bunch of leaders in the federal government, and the biggest bankers.
People.
Yep. Well, the congressmen were, but the biggest bankers,
were
like
not.
J.P. Morgan Chase himself, I believe, him or one of his partners, and a bunch of other of the wealthiest bankers of the time, met in a place called Jekyll Island by Georgia, and they devised a great plan where they said, almost everyone hates the bankers. That's universal, right and left and everything. Let's make a bill called like the Regulating the Bankers Act and everything, but it'll really just create a Federal Reserve banking system. The bill, I think, failed. Next year they brought it back again, and they were able to pass it next year, I believe. And that was 1913.
And it's not a true government agency. It's a private agency. The
Federal
Reserve is not federal.
Is the most incredible purgatory. It's not part of the government, so they're not accountable, but it's not private, so they're not accountable to market forces. So that they're totally alone in purgatory in a separate system. So yeah, they're totally not government, and the government always says, oh, the Federal Reserve is a private central bank. It's not the government. Yeah, who appoints all of the board of governors of the Federal Reserve? The president. So definitely it's at least pretty involved in the government. Also, Congress technically has oversight over them. They can ask them questions and hearings, which probably don't mean much, but
never
they can question them. They question them, but it doesn't matter much. But the Federal Reserve is its own crazy beast, and they are essentially what creates the money and lends the government money, but also because they're the ones who print the money, they can buy assets. So they can print trillions of dollars on a screen or physically, and then they can buy assets. So they actually buy things like
land.
Well, they can buy all assets. They can buy, I think, stocks and bonds and mortgage-backed securities, things packaged, all the securities that are packaged like big funds.
Wow.
So
that
a lot
doesn't sound right.
Yeah. So the Federal Reserve, whenever you hear on the business channels like Fox Business, you hear the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve is $5 trillion. Yeah, it's the government. They shouldn't be having money. They shouldn't have a balance sheet. It's all their assets. So they have
Isn't that like a huge conflict of interest?
Yeah, it's all sorts of messed up. So yeah, like you alluded to, so 1913, we're given a super brief history lesson. 1913, they made a Federal Reserve. Still, the dollar is backed by gold. Fast forward to the Depression, which again was probably caused by the Federal Reserve because it creates a boom and bust cycle because of a whole lot of corruption. The Federal Reserve, so go to like 1930, the Depression, FDR, the worshipped god, communist FDR, who was very close with communists, I think Stalin at the time, big communist who wanted the government to have full control and essentially no freedom. He, in 1934, I believe, confiscated all the gold, said, besides for like 1 ounce or jewelry or whatever, everyone has to give up all their gold or silver under penalty of law. And they actually have the poster that they made. I have a picture of it on my phone because Granite Mines Homeschool Center, a libertarian homeschool center in Ware, has a picture of it in their barn.
Oh my
so I took a picture of it. It was amazing. It made me angry, but it was amazing. So FDR said, all your gold and silver, it's now mine. And then so he took it all. Then he made it all $20 an ounce, I believe. Like he set the price, which again, the government can't set prices, the market has to.
Not supposed to, no.
Yeah, so they made it $20 an ounce. That was 1934, I believe. But still, it was convertible. So if you had dollars, you could still convert it to gold or silver. So at various times, we actually had a bi-metal system, gold and silver. Some countries had gold and some had silver. At various times, we had one or both. So dollar actually had a specific meaning. I forget what it was. I think it was like 0.713 grams or something of silver. So dollar was a measurement. People wonder where it comes from. It came from England or Spain. I think the Spanish dollar is what they used in Mexico and stuff when Spain had a big empire. But anyway, but dollar had a specific meaning to the American colonists. It meant like 0.7 grams of silver, I believe. So it had a meaning. It was like an ounce, which means, whatever, or a pound is 16 ounces. It had a meaning of a measurement. And that meant a certain amount of silver and I believe a certain amount of gold, probably like 0.1 ounce of gold, right? So it had a meaning. And it was always convertible, always a dollar. The notes when they first started making them.
You could go to the bank and you could get that ounce of silver, ounce of gold, whatever it was at the time.
At any time.
That's what you mean by convertible.
Yeah. So and that makes people confident in the system. And as soon as one bank says, no, we ain't giving you gold and silver, screw you, Jocelyn, then it's over. The whole thing is over because then no one's going to want the paper anymore. People are just going to flood to gold and silver. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, fast forward to 1947, I believe. After World War II, the whole world community, all the government gang leaders said, oh, we have to do something about currency and all this stuff, and let's all get on the same page and be happy family. They all met in the famous Bretton Woods Agreement, and they all essentially said, well, the U.S. was already the world superpower. So the dollar is confident. And the dollar is pegged to gold. And let's peg all the other currencies to the dollar, and therefore, by the transitive property, they're all essentially backed by gold.
Okay.
So that was that. Now, this also meant that all the dollars were convertible for gold, right? Over the next few decades, because the United States government is the dumbest of all the politicians, the government gangsters, they printed a lot of dollars, obviously.
More than actual gold
way
that
more
they
than
have.
Way more than they had. Now, this got them in trouble because the other countries, the leaders, the government gangs, and the other countries were not as stupid, and they said, well, those people in D.C. are printing a lot of money. Let's start converting this for gold and silver. So they started cashing in their notes and saying, United States government, we want gold and silver. The federal government, in a blink, had almost no gold and silver reserves left. And then, so we're in 1970s, Nixon, 1970s, I believe. He gave his famous speech about the speculators and they're taking our gold, and we have to suspend indefinitely the convertibility of the dollar to gold and silver. So that's when he totally ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, where he said it's no longer going to be convertible to gold and silver. And the fact that there was not a real insurrection, revolution at that point, and that was one of the biggest turning points in the American history, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, totally.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things, and I can't believe, and I resent my parents and grandparents for not revolting. That was the biggest thing. Again, and governments have done this forever. Kings, kings have shaved off the size of the silver. They get paid their soldiers and stuff. So this happened forever. But when they did that, this was more than shaving off the silver. Yeah,
that's
tremendous.
huge.
It's tremendous.
Yeah,
totally destroying the value of the dollar. Now, so if you look from 1913 when the Federal Reserve was established until today, the dollar has lost 99% of its value. So it used to buy a certain amount of things, like a lot of house or a lot of rent or a lot of gold. Now it buys 99% less. And now that we're printing, or not we, the U.S. government gang, printed like 5-10 trillion over the last year or two.
Correct.
Or more.
It's worth even
We're
less.
going to see once in a year or two when that inflation really gets factored into the market, we're going to see even more inflation. So I have a few examples here of hyperinflation. And again, here, this looks like a silver, a regular dollar bill, and it says dollar silver certificate on top. Now it says Federal Reserve note. That's all it says now.
Correct.
And again,
a new one.
Not a conspiracy. Literally, look, you can see these. So let's see what else it says here. It says, this certificate is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and it says $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. That's what it says. Those things are not on the current
That is not
dollar bills
on. I'm looking as you're reading that because I knew you were going to do that. It doesn't say that on here at all. It just says Federal Reserve note. Doesn't say tender, doesn't say money.
Yep, so here's where we're headed if you want to see the future. We might still be a year or two away from this, but this was Zimbabwe, one of the many countries that inevitably had hyperinflation. This is $100 trillion. Someone gold-plated it, don't ask why. But someone...
That's 100 trillion?
Yeah, in Zimbabwe, yeah. So I also recently came across a 1,000 Italian lira note that I have in my wallet.
Oh, I remember you telling me about that.
And they've gone to the euro in Italy. But they had hyperinflation as well. So if you want to see what it might look like in the United States, we might have $1 million bills soon in the United States. We might have this soon. That's the future I think we're looking at. Again, it might be far away, maybe a few months, maybe a year or two, but not that far.
Because of the hyperinflation.
Yeah.
That is the freakiest looking thing. I mean, this is actually scary to look at.
So yeah, again, I wish we had more time. Going back in history, there's a reason almost every single civilization valued gold and silver as real money. Now, gold and silver do have values. They're used in jewelry, which people say, well, that's not really necessity hard asset because you can't eat it. Yes, well, you know what?
You can melt it down and use it for
Well, it's used in some
computers
industrial
and
things like
phones
computers
and industrial
I think
and
every electronics nowadays.
manufacturing,
But
yeah.
even going back a long time ago, guess what? Women love jewelry.
Mhm.
What kind of jewelry lasts the longest and is
Gold.
actually good quality? Gold and silver. And women can tell, not just because it's prettier and it's expensive, they like expensive things, that's fine. But it actually lasts longer. So if you know basic chemistry, everything has a kind of a half-life and everything deteriorates.
Gold and silver does not.
Silver pretty much never deteriorates. Gold lasts like forever.
Yep.
So if you have something
Silver
that's
will
made of something
tarnish,
else,
but that doesn't mean it falls apart.
Yeah.
That just means it's tarnished.
yeah, so silver will tarnish a bit, and over time, it maybe degrade a tiny bit over billions of years. But gold, like, will literally like last forever. So if you have a piece of gold, it'll last forever. So if it's jewelry that's solid gold, it'll last forever. So you can give it to your grandchild, and in a trillion years, when they're commingling with aliens, your great-granddaughter, a million years, will still have that gold, still in
Yep.
perfect form. So that's, again, a few things about gold. So when I said that certain things last forever, yeah, gold like actually lasts forever.
Yep.
So, and again, guess what? Women like jewelry, and men like women. What does that mean? It means that there's value. If I have a lot of gold and I can give a beautiful necklace that costs $1 million that has 3 ounces of gold in it, that has value because it can get me
Correct.
a great wife and great family and kids. So that's real value, right? So,
Absolutely.
so there's definitely value to these things. Same with diamonds, although diamonds don't really have an inherent value. They're not that
Right.
scarce.
You only use black diamonds for drilling and stuff like that.
They're not quite that
you wouldn't
scarce
be
as they
using
claim,
this
yeah.
one.
So those are just some reasons, and silver also has like I think hygienic antibacterial properties and stuff. And that's why they're used in teeth and everything.
Antimicrobial and stuff. Yes.
And silver also is pretty malleable. Gold, I think, is the most malleable, but it's also, and it's very dense. Obviously, it's one of the densest metals overall as far as just pure weight, but also as far as value, it's the most dense form of value pretty much. Besides platinum, technically is worth a bit more now, I think. So here, let me just show you some stuff before we run out of time. Silver Dave makes himself, he makes 0.925, so almost pure silver bits, 1/10 of an ounce each.
0.925.
Yep.
Okay.
He also does similar with gold, 14 karat gold.
So
10
these
ounce
little
bits.
pieces being that, so if we get to the point where we're bartering and you need a loaf of bread. So,
I would use one of these.
okay. So, you
This
use.
is gold.
Right. So use these little silver, I call them tags. This is what you would use to barter. You would not use a bar of silver or gold because you can't scrape it off and say, here's a sliver for that loaf of bread. These are better to barter with. And so that's why when you see some of these little silver, tiny, I call them tags, I think. This is what you would barter for, and this is why they make them.
So while all this was happening with the bills, I almost forgot about the coins.
Yes.
The U.S. government also, again, was running out of silver, like I said. They were running out of silver and gold. All the coins that are silver used to be made with silver, and the pennies were always made with, I think, 90% copper.
Yeah.
They stole, in 1965, also, the federal government took from 90% of quarters, dimes, and nickels that were silver, they took it out. And they said, yeah, we're going to make it like 0% silver. We're going to make it out of crap like nickel and zinc. So the quarters, you can see this looks kind of like a quarter, a tiny bit different. If you're an expert,
Yeah.
you can tell. But pre-1965, each quarter had a lot of gold. For instance, a lot of silver. Sorry.
Silver, right.
So this, like these 4 quarters, they're each worth like $6 now because it's a lot of silver.
So
They're 90% silver.
a pre-65
quarter
or dime.
or nickel, I believe.
I think you're right. But I
Although
know
nickels are more
definitely, I think definitely dime and quarter are worth pre-65. They have more silver in
90%
them.
silver.
90% silver.
And then the government robbed us. Again, they took it out. And I don't know if they told people, but again, the fact that there was not a revolt in 1965 tells something. And same with pennies in the middle of 1982. They took the copper out of pennies because even copper they ran out of. Again, because the government mismanages everything worse than anyone ever. The government cannot manage anything. The famous saying, if the government took control of the desert, we would have a shortage of sand because that's how incompetent they are. They didn't create a shortage of anything. So if you find pennies
pre-85?
Before 82.
82.
Yeah.
82.
So if you find pre-82 pennies, and you can kind of tell I'm getting good over the last
They
few
have
lines of telling.
the wheat.
Well, that was even older. That was before
Okay.
like 1940 or something. But
Okay.
yeah, these are wheat pennies. But anything before 1982, which you could still find, they're worth at least triple face value.
So when you see the penny on the ground, pick it up. Your grandmother was right.
Yeah. 'Cause if it's worth 3 cents now for each penny, and it'll be worth a lot more in the future because the government actually stopped in 2022, I believe they were going to stop minting pennies because it cost them like 2 cents. Again, they're so incompetent; it costs them money
to make
money.
2 cents to make a 1
So
cent
the other
penny.
big thing for small transactions is gold backs. A company a few years ago found incredible vacuum deposit technology to deposit super duper thin layer, like a molecule thick, of gold into like a bill that you can carry in a wallet very easily, and it's flexible like a bill.
Yep.
It's plastic like most countries' bills.
Goldbacks.
They're called goldbacks because they're self-backed by gold because there's gold in there. Each of them has 1,000th of an ounce for the one, and they also make 5s and 10s and 25s and 50s. So the 25 is bigger and thicker. This is quite thick.
Because it's obviously worth more.
Yep, and it has gold in them, and this is this company's goldbacks.
And it's not the government, so they're actually giving you the value in this bill for what it's actually worth.
Exactly.
Imagine that.
So when people ask about the future of currency, and we can talk about articles of secession, this booklet that I wrote, people think that once we no longer have the federal government or after collapse or if New Hampshire does secede, which is inevitable, what will we do for currency? It's a very easy answer. We can have no law mandating what people use, but people naturally will use dollars, but also cryptocurrencies for far exchanges over distances. But for in-person, we have a lot of options for large, medium, and small purchases. For large, we have gold, we have some silver, we have gold backs, big gold backs. For medium, we have the medium gold backs, 5s and 10s. We have silver rounds, which we have these beautiful rounds over here that are valued right now at about $25, $30. But they could be used. Yep, they could be used for medium exchanges.
And rounds meaning not a coin.
Yeah, and then we have, and also you could use junk silver, 90% silver for medium and small purchases. For small purchases, you can use copper.
Copper.
So we have plenty of copper, or you can use the one gold back, or you can use one silver bit.
Bit. That's the word.
Yeah. So there are so many options for small, medium, and large. For in person, it's like cash but better because it has value and it won't lose value. And for long distances, we have cryptocurrency. So we have tons of great options. Or you can barter or sell whatever you want. Sell your own body. I don't care. Again, once New Hampshire is free and independent, we'll probably have no law mandating what people use or don't use for currency. So people can do what they want, and we could have, once again, true competition with currency.
Which is the way it should be and the way it was meant to be. So I want to invite you back so we can talk about cryptocurrency because that's another whole show. So we'll get together and do that. I know this was a quick overview, but again, drip, drip, drip. We want to give you a little bit. We want you to do research. We want you to think about what you're seeing here, what you're being told, what you were taught, what you're finding out is really not the truth. And we're just trying to open your eyes and say there all are alternatives and not everything you were told is true. So research, reach out, talk to people, talk to experts. Make sure you follow the link on the show and find out exactly what Alu is all about. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us on Chit Chatting with Jocelyn. And thank you again, Alu, for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.